The rain had already turned Royal Street into a mirror of pale lights when the black car pulled up before the Belleterre Hotel. Its brass awning gleamed under the storm, a relic of another century, an era when fortunes were built on elegance, and injustice was disguised behind courtesy. Inside, guests glided across marble floors, their laughter echoing through crystal chandeliers that swayed like glass ghosts of the past. None of them noticed the woman stepping from the car, nor the silent history packed into her lacquered trunks. Lien Chun stood beneath the awning, slender and poised, her silk coat clinging to her shoulders as she watched the doorman struggle with her luggage. Her face, calm and unreadable, bore the serenity of someone who had learned long ago that silence could protect as much as it could imprison. Her English carried the soft trace of a Shanghai accent, musical, measured, and often misunderstood. The staff barely looked at her. A concierge whispered to another, glancing at the gold rings on her fingers and muttering something about tourists with too much money. One bellhop snickered as her translator struggled with the reservation. Their smirks said it all. She was foreign, inconvenient, and to them invisible. Across the lobby, Naomi Brooks wiped her hands on her cleaning cloth and pretended not to notice. Years of working at the Belleterre had taught her that empathy could be mistaken for interference. Still, something about the woman's composure held her. Naomi was 26, quick-witted and self-contained, her dark curls tied back beneath a plain headscarf. Most guests never remembered her face. Yet, in that moment, she saw the quiet humiliation passing between the raindrops, the loneliness of being unheard. Hours later, as the evening settled into its usual rhythm of jazz and perfume, Naomi found one of the woman's trunks in the service corridor. The lock had been forced open. Among the spilled contents, silk garments, old photographs, faded letters, lay a small jade pendant shaped like half a crane. Its edges were chipped, but even under the dull hallway light, it glowed softly, as if holding its own memory of sunlight. Naomi hesitated. Guests lost things all the time. Rings, earrings, wallets, but this felt different. Something about the pendant's weight in her palm stirred a pull she couldn't explain. She checked the tag. Suite 814L. Chin. When she knocked on the suite door, Lien herself opened it, dressed now in an ivory blouse. Behind her, the room looked like a museum. Porcelain vases lined the mantel, and a scroll painting unfurled beside the window, the ink of mountains almost breathing. "I think this belongs to you," Naomi said quietly, holding out the pendant. Lien's expression shifted. A flicker of surprise, then something deeper. "Where did you find it?" "In the service hall. The latch was broken." Lien took the pendant delicately, tracing its fractured edge with her thumb. "It was my grandmother's," she murmured. "Part of something that was taken from us long ago." The rain outside softened to a hush. Naomi wanted to ask more, but before she could, a voice cut through the hallway. Richard Halden, the hotel's manager, brisk and authoritative. "Brooks, what are you doing up here? Guests don't need interruptions." Naomi lowered her eyes. "Just returning something lost, sir." "Then do it and move on," he snapped, his tone as polished as the marble beneath his shoes. He nodded politely toward Lien but didn't wait for her reply. When he left, silence returned. Lien looked at Naomi again, her gaze thoughtful. "You speak carefully," she said, "as if words must pass through fire before reaching your mouth." Naomi smiled faintly. "Working here teaches you that." Something unspoken passed between them, a quiet recognition, like two souls who had each learned how to survive being unseen. Lien stepped closer, her voice low. "Thank you, Miss Brooks." "Naomi Brooks." "Naomi." Lien repeated the name slowly, as if committing it to memory. "If you have time tomorrow, come by. I may need someone who listens." Naomi nodded before she could think better of it. She left the room, feeling the weight of the rain behind her and the faint echo of something beginning. A connection neither woman could yet name, but one that would unravel the Belleterre's golden lies and awaken a truth buried for generations. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with magnolia and humidity. The Belleterre shimmered as if nothing could ever disturb its peace. Yet beneath its gleaming surface, whispers traveled like smoke. About the foreign woman with priceless antiques. About the housekeeper who spent too much time near the upper floors. Naomi arrived early, pushing her cart through the polished corridors, careful not to draw attention. The staff lounge buzzed with gossip. One claimed the guests' trunks contained smuggled art. Another joked she was buying the hotel. Naomi stayed silent, her mind on the woman in Suite 814. She didn't understand why she'd agreed to return, but she felt something in that quiet voice, something that had pierced her own tired silence. When she reached Lien Chen's suite, the door opened before she could knock. Lien greeted her with tea already poured. Delicate porcelain cups painted with cranes flying through clouds. "Please," she said, "sit. You remind me of someone who listens." The room smelled faintly of sandalwood. On the table lay a box lined with faded silk, its lid open to reveal fragments of parchment, brittle and yellowed. Lien lifted one carefully. "These were my grandmother's business documents. She owned land here before the war. A partnership, I believe, in a property that once stood where this hotel is now." Naomi frowned. "You mean this building?" "Yes," Lien said, eyes distant. Her name was Xuelon Wei. She was forced out during a time when people like her were not allowed to own much of anything. "I came here to find what remains." Naomi felt a chill. Her grandmother used to tell stories too, of doors that closed for people like them, of chances stolen before they began. Different histories, same pain. "Why this place?" Naomi asked softly. Lien smiled sadly. "Because history has a way of hiding itself behind beauty. Look too quickly, and all you see is marble." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock. Richard Halden stepped in without waiting for permission, his silver cufflinks catching the light. "Miss Chen, I hope everything is to your liking. We've received your request to access archival records. Unfortunately, those are not public." Lien straightened, her calm like steel. "I was told your hotel values heritage." "Of course," Halden said smoothly. "But some histories are best left resting." He turned to Naomi, his tone sharp. "And you, Miss Brooks? I suggest you return to your post. Housekeeping doesn't handle research." Naomi swallowed her protest and left. But as she pushed her cart down the hallway, her heart pounded with quiet anger. The way he spoke, the arrogance, felt too familiar. Later that night, she found herself drawn back, pretending to clean while Lien worked over her papers. That was when she noticed it, a faint outline behind the wallpaper near the fireplace. Years of cleaning had made her sensitive to such things, the subtle unevenness of surfaces. She touched it. Hollow. Lien followed her gaze. "What is it?" Naomi pressed her palm against the wall. "There's something behind here." With careful hands, they peeled a corner of wallpaper. Dust drifted like memory. Beneath it, a seam appeared. An old, sealed door. Lien's breath caught. "My grandmother designed hidden rooms in her properties. She said privacy was safety." The door wouldn't budge, but Naomi's eyes gleamed with determination. "I know someone in maintenance who owes me a favor." When she left that night, the pendant's image haunted her, the crane without its other half. Something told her this wasn't just about stolen land. It was about silenced lives, forced to fade into wallpaper and dust. Downstairs, the jazz band played for people who'd never imagined the secrets resting above their heads. But for the first time, Naomi felt the pulse of something rising, a quiet rebellion beneath the marble floors of the Belleterre. 2 nights later, the Belleterre's corridors fell silent under the weight of midnight. Naomi stood outside Suite 814, heart racing, her mop bucket an alibi she no longer believed in. From the utility room, she'd borrowed a crowbar, a tool too rough for the elegant world she was about to disturb. Lien waited by the fireplace, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled neatly to her elbows. "If we're caught," she said softly, "you could lose your job." Naomi met her gaze. "If we don't do this, you might lose your history." The metal pried against wood with a sigh. Dust drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of sandalwood and age. Then, with a low groan, The sealed panel gave way, revealing a narrow passage. A faint breeze carried the smell of cedar and forgotten years. Naomi lifted her flashlight, its beams slicing through darkness to reveal polished floors, untouched furniture, and faded murals of cranes and tigers dancing through clouds. It was a room suspended in time. Lien stepped inside as if entering a memory. On the far wall hung a portrait of a woman in a silk cheapao, dignified, proud, her eyes both fierce and kind. "That's her," Lien whispered. "My grandmother, Xuelan Wei." Naomi's light caught a glass cabinet. Inside rested blueprints stamped with the name Wei and Partners Real Estate, 1948, bearing the Bellettere's original design. Lien trembled as she traced the paper's edges. "She built this. Her signature is right here." For a long moment they said nothing. The silence was reverent, as if the room itself were listening. Then Naomi noticed a chest tucked beneath the window. Inside lay journals bound in faded red leather, photographs, and, wrapped in velvet, the missing half of the jade pendant. A tiger carved with the same precision as the crane. Lien's hand shook as she pressed the two halves together. They clicked perfectly, the symbols aligning like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. But peace lasted only seconds. A sound echoed from the hall, a key turning in the suite door. Naomi froze. Lien quickly closed the chest and pulled the panel back into place. When Richard Halden entered, his expression was a mask of corporate politeness. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, eyes scanning the room. "I enjoy quiet," Lien replied evenly. Halden smiled thinly. "Quiet is valuable, especially in old hotels. Too much digging into the past can ruin reputations." Naomi kept her back to him, pretending to dust the table, but she could feel his gaze linger, cold and calculating. When he finally left, tension drained from the air like a slow leak. "We can't stop now," Naomi whispered. "He knows something." Lien nodded, her composure cracking just enough to reveal exhaustion. "If he knows, it's because his family was part of this. The Haldens were partners in the original firm. They forced my grandmother out after the war. She fled back to Hong Kong with nothing." Naomi clenched her hands. "And now her granddaughters come back to take it back." Lien smiled faintly. "No, to make them remember what they erased." Over the next days, they worked in secret. Naomi scanned documents late at night, sending them to a contact at Tulane University, Professor Miles Turner, an art historian known for exposing forgeries in museum archives. He agreed to meet them discreetly, promising to authenticate what they found. But the Belleterre seemed to tighten its grip. Naomi noticed unfamiliar men lingering near the service elevators. Her locker searched. Her schedule changed without notice. Lien's room service trays vanished before she finished meals. Someone was watching. One evening, Naomi found a note slipped under her door. "Curiosity is dangerous. Leave the past buried." She stared at the paper until her hands shook, torn between fear and fury. For years she'd cleaned the Bellettere's floors, wiping away the footprints of people who never saw her. Now she realized the hotel didn't just hide dirt. It buried stories. And this time she wasn't going to let it. By dawn, Naomi's nerves were stretched thin. Every whisper in the hallway sounded like suspicion, every open door like a trap. Yet when she arrived at Suite 814, Lien was already dressed in dark blue, her expression calm but resolute. On the table lay the restored pendant, the crane and tiger united at last, glowing faintly in the sunlight that spilled through half-drawn curtains. "They know," Naomi said quietly. "Someone's watching both of us." "I expected this," Lien replied. "Truth has enemies, especially when it threatens to touch money." She turned the pendant in her hand, the light catching its smooth green surface. "My grandmother once said, a secret doesn't die when you bury it. It grows roots." The Belleterre was built on hers. Professor Miles Turner arrived shortly after breakfast, carrying a leather satchel filled with scanning tools and archival gloves. His gray hair and cautious tone gave him the air of someone who'd learned to measure danger in inches. "I authenticated the documents you sent," he said after greeting them. "They're genuine." Way and Partners was dissolved under questionable terms. The Bellettere's foundation deed includes her original plans, hidden under a later signature, Harold Halden's. Naomi felt anger stir. So his grandson, Richard, inherited stolen ground. Turner nodded grimly. And he'll fight to keep it that way. They worked all morning, photographing every blueprint and journal page. Turner promised to forward them to his contacts at the New Orleans Chronicle. But before he left, he hesitated. You'll need protection. If the Haldens sense exposure, they won't stay polite. He was right. That evening, when Naomi returned to her quarters, she found the lock broken. Her few possessions, books, photos, letters from her mother, were scattered across the floor. On the wall, scrawled in chalk, were two words, "Stop helping." She sat on her bed, trembling, fury warring with fear. She thought of leaving, of pretending she'd seen nothing. But then she remembered the look on Lien's face when she first held the pendant, recognition, grief, pride. Naomi couldn't unsee that truth. The next day, Lien received a summons from Richard Halden to meet privately in the boardroom. Naomi insisted on coming, but Lien refused. "If I go alone, they'll underestimate me," she said. "That's my advantage." The Bellettere's top floor was eerily silent when Lien entered. Richard waited beside the long walnut table, surrounded by oil portraits of stern men whose names were carved into the city's architecture. "Miss Chun," he greeted smoothly, gesturing to a chair. "You've been quite curious." "I prefer honest," she replied. He smiled without warmth. "Honesty is expensive, and history is a flexible thing. We're prepared to offer a generous donation to your family foundation, provided this matter ends quietly." Lien's fingers tightened around her pendant. "You can't buy silence anymore." His eyes hardened. "You misunderstand. Silence is survival." When she left the boardroom, she looked shaken but unbroken. Downstairs, Naomi waited. Worry etched across her face. What did he say? Lien exhaled slowly. "That survival depends on forgetting. But I was raised to remember." That night, they returned to the hidden wing, searching for anything that might make the truth undeniable. Naomi pried open a drawer beneath the portrait of Xuelon Wei and found a letter sealed with wax. It was addressed to the Louisiana Historical Society, 1950, written in Lien's grandmother's hand. "If this reaches anyone willing to listen, know that the Bellettere stands upon my stolen home. One day, someone will find this, and the walls will speak." Naomi read the words aloud, her throat tight. Lien closed her eyes. Then that day is now. Outside, thunder rolled again over the city. The Bellettere's chandeliers swayed as if remembering, and somewhere in the building's bones, the roots of buried truth began to crack the marble. The storm came back heavier than before, drumming against the Bellettere's tall windows like a warning no one could ignore. The hotel buzzed with tension. Rumors of a lawsuit, a scandal, an inheritance dispute, whispered through hallways and into staff quarters. Naomi kept her head low as she pushed her cleaning cart past curious eyes, pretending not to hear her own name spoken in half-voiced gossip. By then, Lien and Professor Turner had already handed over the authenticated documents to Grace Lin, a cultural archivist and friend of Turner's who specialized in lost immigrant histories. Grace was small, sharp-eyed, and fearless, with a camera always hanging from her neck. She met them in a quiet cafe 2 blocks from the hotel, her voice firm. "This isn't just about property theft," she said. "It's about erasure. If we expose this, it becomes more than one family's story. It becomes every story that was buried." They agreed on a plan. Grace would publish an exposé through her independent historical journal while Turner ensured the legal side reached the state archives. Naomi offered to record proof from inside the Bellettere, the hidden wing, the journals, everything that showed what the hotel tried to bury. That night, she slipped into the passage once more, phone camera in hand. Her breath came shallow, each creak of the floor loud in the dark. She filmed the blueprints, the portraits, the documents. Then she lifted her camera to the ceiling mural, the crane and tiger circling each other in eternal balance. The Belleterre hides what it was built on, she whispered. But not anymore. What Naomi didn't know was that Halden had already begun his counterattack. The hotel's lawyers filed an injunction, claiming the documents were fabricated. Reporters were turned away at the door. Security footage was erased. By the next morning, Naomi was suspended, pending investigation, and Lien's keycard no longer worked, but Grace Lynn was faster. The expose hit the digital front page of the New Orleans Chronicle before noon. The Belleterre scandal. How a Chinese woman's legacy built a southern landmark. Photos of the pendant, the blueprints, and the portrait of Xuelan Wei filled the screen. Social media erupted, hashtags, outrage, interviews. Protesters gathered in front of the hotel, holding signs that read, "History belongs to everyone," and "Let the walls speak." Naomi watched it unfold from the sidewalk, disbelief and awe mixing in her chest. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. Neither was Lien. Inside, chaos reigned. Guests checked out early. The board convened an emergency meeting. Richard Halden stormed through the lobby, face red, voice sharp enough to cut marble. "Find her," he shouted to the staff. "Find both of them." But it was too late. The truth had escaped the building. Later that afternoon, the protesters pushed their way into the Belleterre's lobby, chanting for justice. Naomi found herself swept among them, her heart hammering as she looked up at the same chandeliers she had dusted for years. They no longer sparkled with power. They trembled under the weight of truth. Then Lien arrived, calm and unhurried despite the storm of cameras. She wore a simple white dress and held the reunited pendant in her hand. When reporters swarmed, she spoke clearly, her accent no longer softened. "My grandmother's name was Xuelan Wei. She built this place with faith in a land that promised fairness. That promise was broken, but not forever." Naomi stepped forward beside her, her voice steady though her hands shook. "I worked here 5 years. I cleaned these floors. I heard stories and never spoke. But silence only protects those who cause harm. It's time we all listen." For a moment, the entire lobby fell still. The chandeliers shimmered faintly in the light of hundreds of phones filming history being restored. Behind them, the sealed door to the hidden wing stood open at last. The next morning, sunlight broke through the retreating storm clouds, spilling gold across the Belletterre's facade. Crowds still lined Royal Street, but their chants had softened into something steadier, an echo of solidarity rather than anger. Inside, the hotel board gathered for an emergency session that would decide the fate of both the building and its tarnished legacy. Naomi sat near the back of the grand conference hall, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Beside her, Lien Chun stood before the panel of shareholders, her calm unwavering even as cameras flashed and murmurs filled the room. Richard Halden occupied the seat at the head of the table. His composure cracked, his once polished charm now brittle. Lien placed the pendant, its crane and tiger shining as one, on the table. "I don't ask for your charity," she said. "I ask for acknowledgement. This hotel was built on stolen vision, stolen labor, and stolen dignity. The truth has waited long enough." The air was so still Naomi could hear her own heartbeat. Lien continued, her voice carrying both sorrow and grace. "My grandmother, Xuelan Wei, partnered with your founder. She brought designs, capital, and cultural artistry to this place. But after the war, her name was erased, her property seized under laws meant to silence women like her. Today, we restore her presence. Not for vengeance, but for remembrance." Halden leaned forward, his voice smooth with defiance. "You think you can rewrite history with sentiment?" "No," Lien said, meeting his gaze. "History is written in deeds, and we have them." She lifted a folder. Inside were the authenticated blueprints, notarized letters, and the Historical Society's report confirming her grandmother's authorship. "You built your wealth on theft. We're simply returning the name to its rightful place." A murmur rippled through the room. Then, unexpectedly, Professor Miles Turner entered with Grace Lynn, carrying a sealed envelope. "One more thing," Turner announced. "A living witness." From the doorway stepped an elderly woman with trembling hands, Grace Wong, a former maid who had worked at the Belleterre in 1948. "I saw Miss Wei sign the papers," she said, voice breaking. "Then they tore them up and told her to leave. I've waited 70 years for someone to ask." Gasps filled the room. Naomi felt tears sting her eyes as Lien bowed her head, whispering something in Mandarin. Perhaps a thank you, perhaps a prayer. The vote that followed was swift but heavy with consequence. The board, facing overwhelming evidence and public outrage, ruled in favor of restoration. Lien Chen, granddaughter of Xuelan Wei, was granted legal recognition of ownership and a 25% stake in the Belleterre. Richard Halden, stripped of authority, left the hall without a word. Weeks later, the transformation began. The once secret suite was restored and renamed the Wei Heritage Wing, open to the public as a cultural gallery. The portrait of Xuelan Wei hung beneath a plaque reading, "Built on her vision, restored in her name." Naomi, no longer in uniform, walked the marble corridors as the hotel's new cultural liaison, guiding visitors through exhibits about the women and workers who had shaped the city's history. Children traced their fingers over old blueprints while jazz drifted softly from the lobby. No longer background noise, but music of remembrance. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Mississippi, Naomi stood beside Lien in the restored wing. The reunited pendant hung between them, glowing faintly under the glass display. "Do you ever wonder if justice is real?" Naomi asked quietly. Lien smiled. "Justice isn't found," she said. "It's made, by people who refuse to stop listening." They stood in silence, the walls around them alive again, humming with stories no longer hidden. Outside, laughter mingled with the soft rhythm of rain returning to the city, not as a storm this time, but as renewal. The Belleterre had been built on silence. Now it breathed with truth.